Many of us are afraid of flying planes, and no wonder. Despite all the safety of the steel bird, there's always risk of incidents. Sometimes planes fall, explode, and sometimes a plane's roof can blow off. What happened in this case? And is it possible to survive in such a situation? April 28, 1988 was an ordinary day that didn't foreshadow anything special. The passengers of AQ Flight 243 were boarding a Boeing 737-297 from Hilo to Honolulu. Flying over Hawaii, warm weather, nice plane, no one could have imagined that bad things would happen a few minutes after takeoff. The takeoff went perfectly. There was no sign of panic or excitement. The 89 passengers and 6 crew members were safely on their way to Honolulu when suddenly, after 23 minutes of flight, the roof of the plane blew off. 6 meters long, part of the skin above the first 6 rows and the cockpit simply flew away. At the time, the plane was at an altitude of 8,000 meters, and the passengers were lightly clothed because they were in Hawaii after all. The feeling of bitter cold, mad panic, and fear, all this was instantly experienced by the people on board. The rushing air blew violently into their faces, and they were oxygen deprived. The aircraft commander, Robert Schornsteimer, turned and saw that the door to the cockpit had been blown off. Behind him, there were the passengers with the blue sky in the background. Fortunately, the aircraft commander didn't panic, but began to solve the problem professionally. He began lowering the plane and preparing for an emergency landing. The hole was gradually growing. People were getting worse and worse, so it was impossible to delay. Robert requested an emergency landing at Kailua Airport. Those who watched the plane landing later described it as unbelievable. They feared that there might have been a fire when it touched down, or that the plane might have completely collapsed altogether. But Robert performed a miracle. He landed the plane as perfectly as possible. Most importantly, none of the passengers died. The only casualty was one of the flight attendants who was never found because she was thrown from the plane at the very beginning of the incident, while the roof was still blowing off. Many of the passengers and crew were injured, but that's not a big deal. The important thing is they were still alive. What happened to the Boeing 737 on April 28, 1988 can be called a true miracle and one of the most incredible moments in aviation history. This moment even seems fictional, but it's absolutely real, like many other amazing incidents in the history of aviation, which I'll tell you about. Stay tuned to find out more about them. Landing an airplane with its roof torn off is a miracle, but there have been other miracles in the history of aviation. One of them went down in history as the miracle, or more precisely, the Miracle on the Hudson. Just a minute and a half after takeoff, the airliner collided with a flock of birds. Some of them hit the engines. The engines simply failed. The aircraft commander could not figure out how to land the plane on the ground and decided to ditch the steel bird in the water. The maneuver was very risky. The plane could have been torn apart by such a ditching, but Chelsea's professionalism prevailed. The pilot spectacularly ditched the plane in the Hudson River in New York City. All 155 people survived, got out, and waited for rescuers, who soon took them away. And now I'll tell you about the cool ditching that was caught on camera right from the plane. See it for yourself. In April 2013, a small Cessna plane was on a scheduled flight to Molokai Island in Hawaii to Honolulu. As in the case of the Miracle on the Hudson, the plane suffered an engine failure shortly after takeoff. The pilot was forced to ditch the plane in the water. It simply wouldn't have made it to land. The pilot eventually ditched the aircraft 1 kilometer from the shore. Ferdinand Puentes, one of the passengers, turned on his GoPro camera shortly before the plane began to fall into the ocean. He filmed the epic and tense moment of the ditching. You can see the plane hitting the water and the portholes being sprinkled with water. That would have been fine, but the plane immediately began to sink. Ferdinand filmed this moment as well. You can see the evacuation from the plane slowly sinking underwater. Puentes didn't even forget to take selfies. The guy certainly has balls of steel. Although the pilot did a great job, you can't say he did anything unique. Water landings have happened before that. Much cooler was the pilot who managed to land a plane on the water for the first time in history and did it without killing anyone. Richard Ogg was that pilot. In the early morning of October 16, 1956, a Boeing 377 was making a night flight out of Honolulu. Yeah, there it is again. Halfway through the flight, one of the propellers first went out of control and soon the other engine failed. Unable to reach the coast, the pilot began circling near the nearest weather vessel and a U.S. Coast Guard Border Patrol ship that approached. Richard Ogg burned as much fuel as he could, but it couldn't go on indefinitely. It was necessary to ditch. In the end, Richard did what no one had ever done before. He ditched the plane in the Pacific Ocean, and he did it as smoothly as possible, so everyone survived. Only 5 of the 31 people were injured. Before the plane went down, everyone managed to get to the life rafts. An hour later, the Coast Guard boat picked the people up. In case of an emergency, the plane is landed either on the landing strip or on the water. But what to do if neither is suitable? Pilots have to choose right on the spot, and sometimes they manage to land planes even in busy areas. For example, on the road with lots of cars. More recently, 2 similar episodes happened. In April 2020, a plane landed on a busy road with heavy traffic in Canada. The pilot of the Piper PA-28 aircraft made the decision to land the aircraft on a highway in the province of Quebec because of an unexpected breakdown. The pilot did everything perfectly. He put the plane between passing cars, then carefully shifted to the right lane and stopped. No one was injured as a result of the accident. In July of last year, a similar episode occurred in the United States. Initially, the young man was going to fly to an alternate landing strip at Ocean City Municipal Airport, but he had to change his plan. It was necessary to land as soon as possible to save his life. Lucas then decided to land the aircraft on the road. He hoped there wouldn't be many cars on the track. According to witnesses, the plane landed fairly smoothly and didn't hit any passing traffic. That's incredible considering Lucas had gotten his license just a couple of months before the incident. The guy clearly has a great future in aviation. What's scarier for an airplane than engine failure? Many pilots would answer that this is a dive, especially a dive from which it would seem impossible to get the plane out. This happened on February 19, 1985 to a Boeing 747. It was flying from Taipei, Taiwan to Los Angeles. When it was approaching its destination, one of the engines and the autopilot suddenly shut down. The plane went into a roll and began to descend. The plane lost 9 kilometers of altitude in a fairly short period of time. It seemed that tragedy would happen in just a few seconds. But the pilots did the unthinkable. By a miracle, they managed to recover the plane from the dive. During the maneuver, the crew and passengers experienced multiple overloads, and the plane's tail section was damaged. But that wasn't so important. The important thing was that all the people on board survived, and the plane landed safely in San Francisco. It's not always up to the pilots to perform an aviation miracle. Sometimes they can't do anything without dispatchers, or even people they don't know at all. A case that happened in Izhma, Russia confirms this. On September 7, 2010, the Tu-154 aircraft lost power. All onboard indicators, navigation system, and fuel pumps were knocked out. The pilots had to act literally blind. The plane could not reach even a more or less suitable alternative airfield, not to mention the destination airport. When the pilots were looking for a suitable area on the bank or a stretch of river without bends where they could land, they saw something they'd never expected: a full-fledged runway. As it turned out, it was the runway of the former Izhma Airport in the Komi Republic. The airport hadn't been in operation for many years, but the head of the heliport maintained the runway with its own resources. For 12 years, he took care of it almost every day and made sure there was no garbage, foreign objects, and bushes on the runway. In the end, it saved many lives. The pilots landed successfully. No one on board was injured. Just a movie story. Actually, it was even shown in some feature movies and documentaries. That's all, guys. Are you afraid of flying a plane? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and see you later.